Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The present Appropriation Amendment Bill is presented to Parliament as an amendment to the Appropriation Act number 30 of 2021. According to the new amendment for the year 2022, under which government expenditure has been revised, it shows a massive increase in recurrent expenditure for public administration as opposed to the allocation under the previous budget of 2022. Government should have reduced expenditure at a time of severe economic crisis that we undergo presently rather than raising it further while the public suffers from high inflation rates. If benefits were to be given to the penurious needy, some other expenditure should have been cut down, because inflation would not come down as the central bank was continuing to print money to meet expenses. A fortnight ago, it printed 30 billion, according to reports. Unless the government cuts down expenditure, including capital expenditure, we would not be able to reduce the inflation rates and stabilize the economy. Of course, reasons had been given for the increase in expenditure, but increase in expenditure would further increase the inflation rates. In addition to public administration, a notable increase can be observed in the expenditure assigned for the President for defence, education and health. The defence allocation has been increased, and a sum of rupees 212,808 million has been allocated to the Ministry of Public Security. A sum of only 138,560 million has been allocated for agriculture in contrast. Such are the priorities. It appears we are not going to tarnish our reputation as the 14th largest army in the world. Why does our small country need such a large army? Generally, a country would focus on the process of disarmament, demobilization and reintegration, DDR, after a war. These are essential to restore sustainable peace in post-war scenario. We should have reduced our army personnel as soon as the war was over, or at least a few years later. We have today 331,000 army personnel officially, as opposed to Britain's 90,000. This number is to be further reduced by Britain soon. The DDR is one of the significant aspects of the process of post-war peace building. Disarmament, demobilization and reintegration is a process that contributes to security and stability in a post-war recovery context by removing weapons from the hands of the combatants, taking the combatants out of military structures and helping them to integrate socially and economically into society by finding civilian livelihoods for them. But those who fought the war are still in our armed forces. Some of them are still working in the combat areas. It is high time that they are taken out of the north and east and reintegrated into civil society. In most of the cases world over, this process had been implemented with the assistance of foreign governments and international or regional institutions. However, the circumstances under which the government of Sri Lanka happened to take over the sole responsibility for implementing the DDR process have raised serious concerns both at the local and international level. The findings of a recent study show that DDR process was not only implemented in a broad manner in the Sri Lankan context, but only served as a continuation of the military victory over the LTTE. In particular, not much attention was paid to disarming and demobilizing the armed groups, and the so-called DDR process took place in Sri Lanka without international assistance and supervision. One would think that the Sri Lankan powers that be had a purpose in keeping out international assistance and supervision. I would surmise it is to keep the north and east under the military boot. This, coupled together with the expenditure for the armed forces in the amendment bill, show that there has not been any changes in the psyche of the powers that be in Sri Lanka, even after the Aragalaya. Thoughts of singular hegemony still reigns heavily in their minds. All the talk about an all-party government becomes a mockery in the light of such continuous military spending. Therefore, the clarion call to unity is an empty shell. The government under the present president wants to continue to spend large amounts of money to maintain our 14th largest army in the world. It has no intention of forging any form of reconciliation with the minorities. And whom is the government expecting a war with? Against India? Against China? Against America? Or even against Maldives Islands? No. They expect an attack from us, poor Tamils of the north and east, because the government believes that the Tamil people will not continue to endure against the Sri Lankan state's continued oppression and genocide. That is why the Sri Lankan government preferred to conduct the so-called DDR process without international assistance and supervision. They want the presence of the military permanently in the north and east. Sri Lanka's economic crisis is due to many factors. One major factor was the war and the money that Sri Lanka borrowed to buy destructive weapons. Another is the massive corruption among government and defense department officials. A further major reason for the crisis was the ethnic cleansing that forced most of the Tamils to quit small businesses, high-tech related
you have another 2 minutes.
Jobs.
You are having your last 2 minutes.
Manufacturing trades, exportation and training, impeding Sri Lanka's economic development, managerial efficiency and productivity. The state, by its short-sighted racial policies, sabotaged itself. Earlier, the racial discrimination against the Tamils forced many of them to leave Sri Lanka. They are the Tamils who are now offering to pull the chestnuts out of the fire for Sri Lanka if the political problems of the Sri Lankan Tamils are solved. All of the erstwhile racist activities led Sri Lanka to this economic crisis. It did not happen overnight. It started with the ethnic riots of 1958. Israeli professor Oren Yiftachel has said ethnocratic countries often experience ethnic tensions which cause instability. Therefore, as long as Sri Lanka remains an ethnocratic country, there will continue to be instability. This will never lead to a sustainable peace and economic prosperity as expected by His Excellency. The fact that you have increased defense spending to keep the army in the north and east and to establish massive military infrastructures and settlements to continue oppressing the Tamil people shows the instability that will continue in the future. After 13 years since the end of the war, why is the military being allowed to occupy our people's lands and buildings, our forests and shores? The existing problems that the Tamils face, which were brought to the notice of the President, are conveniently forgotten in the speech. We feel, though the President had positively responded to our queries regarding the day-to-day problems the Tamils face, apart from the need to solve the political problems of the Tamils, he prefers to remain silent in Parliament regarding our problems, lest he disturbs the hornet's nest. I am reminded of Robert Walpole, who was Prime Minister of England in 1715 or thereabout, whose policy was let sleeping dogs lie. Maybe because our Tamil youths in recent times have not resorted to Aragalayas in their areas, he believes we are but sleeping canines, best left to be unsaid and unreferred to. But I am sure this time Geneva would reiterate its stand quite positively. I like to remind the contents of my request letter, to which His Excellency responded positively. His Excellency promised to release all Tamil political prisoners. Nothing has come out of that promise. It is said that there is a move to release some persons taken into custody on suspicion after 2019, just in time for the Geneva deliberations. None are going to be fooled by such gimmicks if they are true. If the case of the Tamil political prisoners, some of them languishing in jails for over a quarter of a century, is not going to be considered in a humanitarian manner, considering the long period of incarceration and the type of diseases that have been contracted by some of them, I'm wondering if any Tamil parliamentarian could be ethically and morally be called upon to join in an all-party government. Many of these prisoners had been found guilty solely on their confessions made to officers under the PTA. Police officers under the PTA. Such confessions to police officers cannot be accepted as evidence under our regular criminal law. That was why I had asked for the release of the Tamil political prisoners and for the scrapping of the draconian PTA from our statute books. Instead, it is being now used against Aragalaya leaders. These leaders would soon be called terrorists. Just give me half a minute, sir. Any attempt to bring in diverse political viewpoints together under one umbrella must be preceded by genuine acts of goodwill towards those holding such viewpoints. It is useless saying, join us and I will give you a free hand to express your views. The moment a Tamil parliamentarian joins the government, he would lose his freedom of speech. Majority in the governing party will rule the roost. I hope the Tamils whose names have been included in a ministerial list recently would wait till the Geneva deliberations are over before taking office. I have no objections to attending a meeting of party leaders friendly towards this government to put forward the viewpoints of the Tamils. Finally, my request to the donor countries and the IMF is that in this difficult situation for Sri Lanka, you should definitely help to save the people of Sri Lanka from starvation. But please see that you do your assistance in such a way that your assistance is not used to suppress the rights of the Tamil people and be used for defense expenditure. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
There's a subsidy that has been promised for kerosene, but no funds have been allocated. 0 rupees have been allocated for that. This is in contrast to 46,000 billion that has been allocated for social safety net. We welcome that. In contrast, I can cite the health allocation, 248 billion, a 3% increase for health allocation. So what is in words as promised in the budget proposals, you can also see it in rupees. I'm just contrasting that with the promise to grant relief to kerosene users, yet no allocation is made. Now this is significant because the whole approach of this government is to silence the middle class and upper middle class. So you are making petrol available now, you are making super diesel available now, but diesel is in short supply and there is no kerosene. Your priority must be the other way around. You must address the needs of those who need it most, not the upper middle class. But you are doing that because you think if you silence the upper middle class, then you can get by with blue murder. Blue murder is what is happening in the country all around. Every day we hear of shooting, people being shot dead here, there, everywhere. Police are not investigating any of those crimes. Police in their thousands are deployed to stifle genuine people's protests. When there are 500 people marching, there is a police force of about 1,000 policemen who go to stop that protest. Tear gas is used, water cannons are used, and now, lo and behold, the PTA is used. Detention orders under the PTA have been signed by the president himself. He normally signs in English, but in these detention orders he has signed in Sinhala for some reason. Ordinarily he signs in English. We are familiar with his signature. But these 3 detention orders that he has signed in Sinhala. Is there a change in personality? Is he appealing to some sections in the country by now beginning to sign in Sinhala, and that too on detention orders? Now these economic recovery and your manner of governance have a strong connection. You see, if a beggar comes to my doorstep and begs for food for their children, for his children, I'll be compelled to give him some money. He might come regularly, get some money and go. But the day I find out that he is using that money to get drunk and go home and beat up his wife and his children, naturally I will stop giving him money after that. So that's what the international community also does. You scream here saying, how can you stop giving us money? You can't prescribe to us human rights standards, etc. No, you can. If you find that that money is being misused, or you are oppressing other people in this country, surely those countries will not lend you money. Now I must say something else also. We are all glad that there has been an agreement reached, a staff level agreement reached with the IMF. The government announces that. Well and good. But as soon as the government announced it, this is what the IMF has issued, a statement. It says, and I quote, the new staff level agreement is subject to the approval by IMF management and the executive board in the period ahead, contingent on the implementation by the authorities of prior actions, including financing assurances from Sri Lanka's official creditors. This is contingent on something. It is not done yet. We hope it will be done. But you have an obligation. You have to first perform that. Budget needs to be consistent with the economic reform program and macroeconomic framework underlying by the IMF. So this is the this is the statement that has been issued. Similarly, the government was heard in the last couple of days saying Japan was going to lead a conversation with a group of countries to assist Sri Lanka with regard to bridging finance. We all thought, okay, that's a good thing. But now we have Japan saying, no, we never agreed to that. We never agreed to do that. So I think the president, when he became prime minister, came on national television and said, I will not hide anything from the people. I will tell you the truth. But now that is blurring a little. That has started to blur. You're not telling the whole truth. You are now beginning to tell the people what they like to hear, what we also like to hear. But that's not the whole truth. You using the PTA against unarmed protesters will definitely impact on the economic recovery of this country, and that will impact on the poor people of this country mostly, not the upper middle class whom you have silenced by giving petrol, not the upper middle class whom you think you have silenced by giving super diesel.
Honourable Member, you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you. So you need to rethink your priorities. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a government that is indulging in oppressing people's legitimate protests, also seeking financial assistance. The interim budget deficit has increased by 43% to the one that we approved in November last year. In November last year, we approved a deficit of 1,600 billion. The interim budget that has been now proposed by the Finance Minister cum President, the deficit is 2,300 billion. Middle class whom you think you have silenced by giving super diesel.
Honourable Member, you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you. So you need to rethink your priorities. You can't have it both ways. You can't have a government that is indulging in oppressing people's legitimate protests, also seeking financial assistance. The interim budget deficit has increased by 43% to the one that we approved in November last year. In November last year, we approved a deficit of 1,600 billion. The interim budget that has been now proposed by the Finance Minister cum President, the deficit is 2,300 billion. And 85% of that is to be supplied by revenue from the country itself, and that is why you have increased the VAT rate. I heard speakers in the government saying, well, we complained about reducing the VAT rate. Yes, we complained. That was one of the main causes for this economic crisis, from 15% to 7%. But the answer doesn't lie in increasing it back to 15% after the country has fallen into this debt, and after the people have been subjected to all the hardship and the economic deprivation that they have been subjected to. That is not the answer. So,
Honourable Member, please wind up.
Thank you. So the interim budget only heaps more misery on people. There are some good aspects with regard to relief. Some of the recipients, numbers being added, 726,000 more and all of that. But all that is taken away by an increase in VAT 3%, which is an indirect tax that all will have to bear. Therefore, increasing the deficit and hoping to supply that deficit through local revenue is not the answer. You have to comply with international human rights standards if you are to really get relief from the international community. Thank you.